Good morning, everyone. I'm Gerard Ramalho here in the News 3 studios, and I have with me a special guest today. He is the head of the Environmental Protection Agency Administrator. Scott Pruitt is with us. Sir, thanks for your time.
Gerard, good to see you.
Good to see you
Glad
as
to be
well.
with you this morning.
I understand you have been touring some of Nevada's mines with our governor, Governor Sandoval. The mining industry still very big here in Nevada, and curious to know your thoughts on how you regulate this industry. If you talk to the workers, they're concerned about too much oversight because that could hinder production, could affect jobs, but we know traditionally mining has the potential to pollute as well, so there's a balance there.
Yeah, what we see with the mining industry in Nevada is what we see in other states with the mature industries. The mining industry is a mature industry, which means largely there's robust regulation. It's been laws and regulations on the books for decades, and so the states across the country that have that type of industry are used to regulating those kinds of businesses and industry, and as such, that means we have a great partner. From a federal perspective. I think what's often overlooked in this dynamic between the state and Washington, D.C. and the federal government is that we each have a role. The state has a role, and the federal government has a role, and we should work in partnership to achieve good outcomes for the environment, but also recognize the importance of industry being a partner in that process as well, and that's been displaced, I think, the last several years.
Since you brought up the term role, I'm interested to know your philosophy on the role of the EPA and how it works with Congress, and for that matter, how you work with the president. Do you defer to what the president wants, or who kind of has the say here?
Well, with respect to our mission, I think one of the things that's missed often is that Congress, way back in the 1970s, when the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act, those environmental statutes were adopted, there was tremendous amount of language in those laws giving power to the states, prescriptively so, because Congress recognized back then a one-size-fits-all strategy is not terribly successful when you look across the country. The issues in Nevada with respect to water are much different than they are in Minnesota. Because you know, Utah, a state not too far from here, second most dry state in the country, and states like Minnesota are not. So you have to have a partner from a state perspective. Congress recognized that, and that's what we administer. Fundamentally, my job is to administer statutes. As far as the president is concerned, his leadership in these areas is so key because he cares, as we all do, about clean air and clean water. But he also recognizes we can be about jobs and growth at the same time as being good stewards of our natural resources and stewards of the environment. We can achieve both. It was the past administration told us to choose. Choose between jobs and protecting the environment. We've never been there as a country, and we don't have to be. We can be about both, and that's what the president, I think, is focused upon.
Responsible regulation,
responsible
oversight.
I think common sense regulation, common sense in the sense of saying what is our objective, administering a statute, being clear as far as the authority given to us. The past administration got in trouble, Gerard, when they passed regulations that were untethered to the statute. As an example, the Waters of the United States rule. You know, it was a rule that said we're going to redefine, reimagine what a water of the United States is to include a puddle, a dry creek bed, and an ephemeral drainage ditch. And that's not an overstatement. There was a lawsuit, 30+ states sued, and the courts intervened and stopped that from going into force. So the point here is when we do our job, we have to do it consistent with the statute, recognize federalism, the partnership of the states, focus on process, being transparent in rulemaking, and recognize that it can be about the environment as far as stewardship, but also not being an impediment to jobs.
Yeah. I can't have the head of the EPA here and not bring up climate change. Climate change, of course, an issue that many people seem to have opinions about, but there are differing opinions. We're coming off one of our hottest summers ever here in southern Nevada, one of the warmest winters ever.
And last year it was a lot of precipitation last year.
And the previous year we had, finally we got some rain, Lake Tahoe filled up. People don't seem to dispute the fact that the climate is changing, but there are two areas that are disputed, and I'd love to get your thoughts. One is man causing the climate to change? And the other area is, should we be alarmed? Because we hear about things like the polar caps melting and oceans rising and hurricanes and tornadoes that are more intense. What are your thoughts about this?
I think that's well said. I mean, I think that you're right. I think no one disputes the climate is changing. We see that that's constant. We obviously contribute to it. We live in the climate, right? So our activity contributes to the climate changing to a certain degree. Now, measuring that with precision, Gerard, I think is more challenging than is let on at times. Yeah. But I think the bigger question is what you ask at the very end. Is it an existential threat? Is it something that is unsustainable? Or what kind of effect or harm is this going to have? I mean, we know that humans have most flourished during times of what? Warming trends. I mean, so I think there's assumptions made that because the climate is warming, that necessarily is a bad thing. Do we really know what the ideal surface temperature should be in the year 2100, in the year 2018? And that's somewhat fairly arrogant for us to think that we know exactly what it should be in 2100. So there are very important questions around the climate issue that folks really don't get to. And that's one of the reasons that I've talked about having an honest, open, transparent debate about what do we know, what don't we know, so the American people can be informed. Yeah. And they can make decisions on their own with respect to these issues. Now, there's a bigger issue for me at the agency, and that's whether we actually have authority to regulate CO2 and greenhouse gases under the Clean Air Act, because that's something that's actually been tried by the agency twice, and they have failed twice. They had something called the tailoring rule that was struck, that the U.S. Supreme Court intervened, and then the Clean Power Plan, the so-called Clean Power Plan by the past administration, was also stopped by the U.S. Supreme Court.
And it's no more, right? We've gotten rid of it.
No more. Well, it's more in process there, right. But it never went into effect because the U.S. Supreme Court took the unprecedented step of intervening and issuing a stay while the case was being litigated. So the previous administration tried twice to regulate, flunked twice, and so we're stopping, at this point saying, what authority do we have? And that matters, because I think in today's time, it's fifth grade civics, that we are in the executive branch. We exist to execute the law, not legislate or make the law. And I think the past administration took this view that if Congress hasn't spoken, we'll speak for them, we'll pinch hit. Yeah. And that's not how it works. So there's a process issue, there's a legal issue on one side, and then you've got the other issues that you've raised, which I think are all very important.
I want to ask you briefly also about the Paris Accord, the climate accord. Democrats were very critical, called it hugely responsible on the part of the president, on the part of the U.S., but I've heard rumblings and I've read some clippings that perhaps the president might be interested in jumping back in if there was a revamped deal somehow. Do you have any information on that?
Well, look, I mean, first, for anyone, Democrat, Republican, to look at what took place in Paris and not recognize that it was a bad business deal for this country is just simply not telling the whole story. Yeah. It was not about CO2 reduction. If it was about CO2 reduction, they would not have let China and India take until 2030 to reduce their CO2 footprint. And I want to say something to you here too. We as a country have reduced our CO2 footprint by almost 20% from the years 2001 to 2014. Yeah. So we've made tremendous progress as a country. In fact, when you look at developing country, not developing, but mature economies across the globe, we are doing more than anyone else. So we have really nothing to be apologetic about, and that's largely been through innovation and technology. But Paris, in my view, was just simply something that was not really good for this country, and the president recognized that. He's taken an America First approach. He's not been apologetic about what we've achieved, and he said we're going to continue to engage, which I think is what you're talking about. He said that in the Rose Garden last June when we were there together, that this is a bad deal for this country, but we're going to continue to lead through action, and we're going to stay engaged in discussion.
Yeah. The president has rolled back regulation on the coal industry. He's used the term the war on coal.
Well, that was a term used by the last administration.
What do you see happening there? Is this about bringing back jobs? Is this about?
It's happening. It's happening.
I mean, is there newer technology that makes it cleaner, or what's the thought there?
Well, a couple of things. One, there was a declared war on coal. Mm-hmm. And I think generally a war on fossil fuels. I mean, that's what the Clean Power Plan actually represented by the past administration, was a coercive approach, regulatory approach to force power generation as we generate electricity away from fossil fuels to renewables. And look, renewables need to be a part of our energy mix as we generate electricity.
You're not opposed to alternative energies.
No, I mean Oklahoma,
that work, right?
I mean, for instance, the state I hail from, Oklahoma is in the top 3 in the country in the use of wind in the generation of electricity. So I get that, but to think that that's going to be the dominant fuel or dominant energy source on how we generate electricity, I think is just simply fanciful. Yeah. It's intermittent by definition. So I think when you think about these issues, from my perspective, there was a declared war on coal. The EPA was weaponized against certain sectors of our economy, fossil fuels generally, and that's just not the role of a regulator. It's not the role of the EPA or any other agency at the federal level to use its authority in a way that is weaponized against certain sectors of our economy.
Sure.
So when the president says the war is over, that's what he means. Now that doesn't mean that we're favoring some over others either. It's really trying to maintain a position of neutrality, say, look, it's important that each of these, from coal to natural gas to oil to hydro to nuclear, renewables across the spectrum, they all should be what? A part of our energy mix. We truly should have an above the line, all above approach. Yeah. We should be, look, the president talked last year about energy dominance, not energy independence, energy dominance. And we can actually achieve that as a country and actually improve the environment as well.
Looking at a variety of options there. Last question, because I know I'm feeling the rap here from
well, it's your,
the folks here.
It's your show.
Last question. Here in Southern Nevada, we are concerned very much about water, and part of the reason for that is we have our source, Lake Mead, right here in our backyard, so we can see when the water levels drop. Curious to know your position on whether there is a water crisis, or is it a management thing, and is this an area that needs to be looked at, reviewed? Should we be concerned about?
You know, I think generally when you look at these issues, whether it's Nevada or Utah or the western part of the country, overall, you have a lot of interior, BLM, public land issues, management issues that are cross sections. So one of the things that we are working very diligently to achieve as an agency is interagency cooperation.
Sure.
The EPA to Interior to other agencies that deal with these issues. And as you know, at Interior you have Fish and Wildlife, you have BLM, you have these various sub-agencies as well. And so there's so many involved that cooperation is very important to address the issues that you're talking about. So as an example, on permitting, one of the things that we're seeking to do is become much more efficient at making a decision on a permit so that people know up or down, am I going to get the permit or not? In fact, by the end of 2018 at our agency, we're going to have a decision up or down on permits within 6 months. That's never been done before. That provides certainty to those in the marketplace, and I think it gives certainty to states, it gives certainty to these resource issues, and I know that Secretary Zinke and I have talked about that from Interior with respect to issues around Lake Mead, not specifically, but generally in the West, and I think that it's something that is going to show some positive developments going forward.
Great.
Yeah.
Administrator Pruitt, thank you so much for visiting Nevada and for spending some time with us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Likewise.